Florence. 1478, Lorenzo de Medici has just withdrawn 75,000 florins from the public treasury of the Florentine Republic, money that does not belong to him, money he has no legal authority to touch. To cover a hole in his private bank, the brother he loved was murdered 3 months earlier, in front of the high altar, during Mass. The Pope has excommunicated him, and his bankers in Bruges have lost everything, every florin of capital, every line of credit, every recoverable debt. Betting on a Duke of Burgundy who died on a snowfield in Lorraine, half-eaten by wolves before anyone found the body. The bank that financed the Renaissance, the bank that was the Renaissance's wallet, is bleeding out. This is the story of how Europe's greatest bank broke. Florence, 1397. A 37-year-old merchant named Giovanni di Bicci de Medici registers a new banking partnership in the Mercato Nuovo. He is not the first banker in Florence, the city has dozens. He will not be the largest in his lifetime. But what Giovanni invents over the next 30 years will define finance for the next 600. He builds branches. By the 1430s, the Medici Bank has offices in Rome, Venice, Pisa, Avignon, Geneva, Bruges, and London. Each branch is its own company, its own partnership, its own ledger, its own losses contained. If Bruges fails, Rome does not have to pay for it. We call this limited liability today. Giovanni is doing it in the 1420s. He invents around the church's prohibition on usury. You cannot charge interest on a loan, but you can sell a merchant a bill of exchange in Florence, payable in London at a different rate, 6 months later. The exchange rate hides the interest. The church is satisfied. The bank is paid. He invents the discretionary gift to depositors, paid annually like clockwork, disguised as charity. The Vatican itself parks its money with him. When Giovanni dies in 1429, he leaves his 2 sons, Cosimo and Lorenzo the Elder, a fortune of approximately 180,000 florins. To put that in scale, a skilled stonemason in Florence in 1429 earned roughly 30 florins a year. Giovanni's estate could pay 6,000 stonemasons for a year. He has built, in 3 decades, the largest private fortune in Europe. His son Cosimo will more than double it. Cosimo de Medici takes over the bank in 1429. By 1434 he effectively controls Florence. Not as a king, the city is technically a republic. But as the man whose bank holds the city's money, whose donations build its cathedrals, whose loans finance its government. He inherits, almost as a birthright, the most profitable account in 15th century Europe. The papal account. Every bishop's appointment, every cardinal's hat, every pilgrim's offering, every indulgence sold across Christendom, it all flows through the Vatican. In the Vatican, by the 1430s, banks with the Medici. The Rome branch in some years generates more profit than the entire rest of the network combined. This is the bank that pays for Brunelleschi's dome. This is the bank that keeps Donatello on retainer. This is the bank that commissions Botticelli, for Angelico, Filippo Lippi. The Renaissance you learn about in art history? The Medici Bank wrote the checks. By 1450 the bank has 9 branches and roughly 60 employees. Its annual profit in good years runs to 30,000 florins. Cosimo runs it conservatively. He audits branch managers personally. He recalls bad lenders. He keeps loans short, well collateralized, mostly to merchants and to the church. In 1455 the King of Naples asks Cosimo for a loan. Cosimo refuses. Sovereigns, he writes to his branch in Rome, do not pay back. He has, by this point, read his own bank's history. When Cosimo dies in 1464, the Medici Bank is the largest financial institution in Europe. Its capital base sits around 90,000 florins. Its branches stretch from London to the Levant. His son Piero, called the Gouty because his arthritis is so severe he can barely walk, runs the bank for 5 years, and dies. In December 1469, the bank passes to Cosimo's 20-year-old grandson. His name is Lorenzo. History will call him the Magnificent. His bookkeepers will call him something else. Lorenzo de Medici is a poet. He is a patron. He is, arguably, the greatest diplomat of the 15th century. He commissions Botticelli's Birth of Venus. He keeps the young Michelangelo in his household and lets him eat at the family table. He is also, by every honest accounting, the worst banker in his family's history. The problem is not Lorenzo personally. The problem is that under Lorenzo, the bank's branch managers, the men actually making the loans, in cities Lorenzo will never visit, start to gamble. The Bruges branch is run by a man named Tommaso Portinari. Bruges, in the 1470s, is the trading capital of Northern Europe: wool, tapestry, dye, alum. The branch manager's job is straightforward: finance merchants, lend short, collateralize, collect. Portinari decides he wants to be a courtier instead. He attaches himself, personally, to Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. Charles is the most ambitious prince in Europe. He is trying to carve out an entire new kingdom between France and the Holy Roman Empire. A Burgundian state running from the North Sea to the Alps. He needs money. Constantly. And Tommaso Portinari, on behalf of the Medici Bank, gives it to him. The exact figures are debated by historians, but conservative estimates put Portinari's loans to Burgundy at roughly 70,000 florins by the mid-1470s. The bank's entire capital base, you will recall, is around 90,000. Meanwhile in London, the Medici branch under Gerard Canigiani is making the same mistake with a different king. Edward IV needs cash for his French campaign of 1475. The London branch lends him approximately 120,000 florins. By some calculations, the Medici Bank's exposure to two monarchs alone, Charles the Bold and Edward IV, now exceeds the bank's entire capital. Cosimo, had he been alive, would have ordered both branches closed within a week. Lorenzo does not notice. Or he notices and does not act. There is no surviving correspondence from him to Portinari demanding repayment until it is already too late. Then, on the morning of January 5, 1477, on a frozen field outside Nancy in Lorraine, the Burgundian army is annihilated by a Swiss Confederate force. Charles the Bold's body is found 3 days later, half buried in mud, half eaten by wolves, identifiable only by the long battle scar across his cheek. In the fingernails his page recognized. The Duke is dead. Burgundy is partitioned between France and the Habsburgs within weeks. The kingdom Charles was building no longer exists. And the loans the Medici Bank made to that kingdom are now worth nothing. The Bruges branch is insolvent within months. Word reaches Florence by the spring of 1477. Lorenzo discovers his bank is short tens of thousands of florins. He has, at this point, exactly two options. The first is to let the failed branches go bankrupt. The limited liability structure his great-grandfather invented 80 years earlier was designed precisely for this, to let one branch fall without taking the others down. He chooses the second option. He starts moving money from the healthy branches to plug the holes. When that runs short, he moves money from his own personal accounts. When that runs out, he begins moving money from the Monte, the public treasury of the Florentine Republic. Forensic accounting performed after his death will eventually reveal that Lorenzo withdrew approximately 75,000 florins of public money to cover his bank's private losses. He had no legal authority to do this. He had political authority, which in Florence at the time was the same thing. In April 1478, while Lorenzo is at Mass in the Cathedral of Florence, assassins from the rival Pazzi banking family, backed by Pope Sixtus IV, who had quietly moved the papal account away from the Medici 4 years earlier, stabbed his brother Giuliano 29 times in front of the high altar. Lorenzo is wounded but escapes through the sacristy. The Pope's response to the failed assassination is to excommunicate the survivor and place all of Florence under interdict. The London branch defaults the same year. Edward IV will never repay. The Avignon branch closes shortly after. By the early 1480s, the Medici Bank, which a generation earlier had been the largest in Europe, operates a skeleton network of branches kept solvent only by transfusions from the Florentine state. Lorenzo dies in April 1492. He is 43 years old. The bank he inherited at full strength, he leaves at roughly 1/3 its peak capital. His son Piero, called the Unfortunate, not the Magnificent, inherits both Florence and the bank. In November 1494, Charles VIII of France invades Italy. Piero capitulates without a fight. The Florentines, furious, expel the Medici from the city. The new Republican government opens the books of the Monte and discovers the missing 75,000 florins. The Medici Bank's remaining assets are seized. Within a few weeks, the bank that had financed the Renaissance simply stops existing. Here's the part that gets left out of the art history version. The Medici Bank did not collapse because of greed. It did not collapse because of debauchery, or hubris, or some Renaissance excess. It collapsed because of leverage. For 70 years, the Medici took deposits, short-term, redeemable money, and used them to make long-term loans to monarchs. When the monarchs paid, everyone won. When one monarch died on a battlefield in Lorraine, the depositors wanted their money back, and the bank could not produce it. A bank funded short and lent long, betting on sovereign repayment. When the collateral, Burgundy itself, evaporated overnight, Lorenzo was margin called. He plugged the hole with the only collateral he had left, the public treasury of the city he ruled. Florence eventually came for that collateral too. This is the pattern. It will repeat. It will repeat in 1672, in Amsterdam, with the De Witt brothers. It will repeat in 1772, in London, with the Air Bank. It will repeat in 1873 in New York, in 1929, in 1998, in 2008. Each time the bankers will have different names. The collateral will have a different shape. The mechanism will not change. A bank that lends to power is one missed payment from being broken by it. 470 years after Lorenzo emptied the Monte, another bank would make the same bet from the opposite side, funding both Allies and Axis on the assumption that institutional standing was its own collateral. It wasn't. We covered that story Tuesday.